It's Monday, the 8th of November. A winter warning, the NHS boss appealing for the unvaccinated to get jabbed, with COVID hospital admissions 14 times what they were this time last year.
As we look into winter, I think we're very clear, this is going to be a difficult winter.
And I'm here at the Department of Health as the Health Secretary says jabs in arms are the way to save Christmas.
And I'm at Heathrow, where after more than 600 days of COVID closures, transatlantic flights from the UK to the US will resume.
PM pressures MPs prepare for an emergency debate on the SLEAZE row that's rocked the Conservative Party. Lawsuit filed for the deadly concert where 8 people died as more emerges about the victims. A lovely man and a great father, the wife of a man killed by a shark off the coast of Western Australia, pays tribute to her husband.
Rest in peace, Paul. He died what he enjoyed doing the most, which was exercising.
And I'm live in Glasgow as the second week of COP26 gets underway. Meanwhile, the mood music from Australia isn't great. They say they will continue to sell coal for as long as the world continues to buy it.
Good morning, everybody. There's a warning this morning from the head of NHS England that it's facing a winter like no other, with hospital COVID admissions at 14 times the level they were a year ago. The health service is urging everyone who hasn't yet had a COVID vaccine to take up the offer and is doubling down on its appeal for people to get their booster jabs as the government looks to avoid tightening restrictions in the run-up to Christmas. Milena Veselinovic reports.
As the nights get colder and we're mixing indoors more, concerns are growing this may lead to even more infections. And with 4.5 million people still unvaccinated, authorities say getting jabbed is key to avoiding restrictions this Christmas.
We have had 14 times the number of people in hospital with COVID than we saw this time last year. And we've also had a record number of A&E attendances and indeed a record number of 999 calls. So as we look into winter, I think we're very clear, this is going to be a difficult winter. And the things that we would encourage people to do is anything that they can do to protect themselves. So that's the COVID vaccine, it's the flu vaccination in particular.
But Saika Parveen put off getting her vaccine because she was pregnant. She died of COVID, never meeting the baby girl she gave birth to while she was in a ventilator.
She planned so many things, and this disease didn't give her a chance to. She didn't even know, she have a baby girl, a boy.
It's tragedies like this one that scientists say vaccines can prevent. 10 million booster jabs have been given out so far, and the government says it's vital that people come forward as soon as they're called so they're protected ahead of winter. The message is landing with many.
It's very simple. Get vaccinated, it's proven technology, crack on with it.
I would get the booster to protect myself, my children, and my parents who are elderly.
But not all. Some experts say this is down to the lack of clarity about the threat that COVID still presents.
This is a very confusing public health messaging from government, because on the one hand, is concerned about the level of COVID infections and really urging everyone to have the vaccination. But on the other hand, it's telling people that they can actually mix freely without any infection control measures. And they can actually mix without face coverings, without physical distancing.
With the NHS already under strain, fears are mounting for what this winter might bring. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Talking about that in more detail throughout the course of the day. Meantime, the International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan is joining us now from COP26, which we'll talk about in more detail coming up. Ms Trevelyan, but first, an emergency debate later on today on a sleazy Prime Minister and his government. How are you going to start to reassure the public?
So the debate this afternoon, I'm sure, will raise concerns from many colleagues about the issue which was, and obviously the Leader of the House has identified that the vote last week conflated two issues inappropriately, but that the key message was that MPs believe that the process doesn't have a proper appeal system built into it, and I know that many colleagues will be raising that this afternoon, and I understand that the Speaker of the House will also be making a statement later on to identify how we can move forwards to help solve that issue so that MPs have the same level of competence, they have a voice of appeal if they are charged with an issue as anyone would in a work tribunal elsewhere.
Will the PM be at the debate later?
I'm afraid I don't know that.
Should he be?
Well, these sorts of debates are usually led and fronted by the ministers who are doing it, I imagine, but I'm afraid I don't know because I'm up in Glasgow, that Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Leaders team will probably be covering.
My question is whether you feel that on balance he should be, given that your party, the government, the Prime Minister have had an absolute kicking this weekend and towards the end of last week as well.
So my opinion would be that no, he shouldn't be there. He will no doubt, as we all do, have the House of Commons on in his office as he's dealing with many, many other issues that only a Prime Minister can deal with, and he will get a briefing of the key issues raised by colleagues from across the House later, and I believe that the Leader and other ministers will be well placed to take the dispatch box this afternoon.
Yeah, OK. Perception's reality, of course, and if he's not there, people will... the public will form their own opinion on why he may or may not be there. They'll also look at the number 10 refurbishment. They'll look at his holiday in Marbella, which apparently was £25,000 worth for a week. They'll look at his holiday in Mustique as well. And they'll be wondering about whether the Prime Minister is playing fast and loose with the rules.
Well, the Prime Minister has followed the appropriate ministerial guidelines and registered all those activities. In the case of staying with his very old friend Zach Goldsmith for a well-earned holiday a few weeks ago, he set out where he was, as we all do if we receive hospitality from friends or indeed others who are not close friends, and he's done that.
Okay, he didn't list it appropriately though. We both know that, don't we?
So the system is there, and he's followed the procedure, and I believe that the ministerial code is considered to be suitably approved. So that's good, and I think, we come back to the point of, the fact that a Prime Minister who has managed an incredibly challenging time over the last 18 months with incredible success, as you were talking about the COVID vaccine just now, and the importance that we become resilient as a nation to COVID. He has led the way on that, driven unbelievably hard indeed, nearly died from the disease himself before a vaccine had been invented, so he wasn't protected, which is why, to your earlier point, it's so important that people are getting their vaccination. In fact, I just booked my booster vaccine yesterday on the line that's now open for the 7th of December, which is the day after my 6-month moment, and I think that's really, really good, really effective. So I would recommend everyone who's already been double jabbed to get out there and get their booster booked in, but also to make sure that if you haven't yet had your first 2 jabs, that you do that, because it will help ease strain on our incredibly tired doctors and nurses who are looking after us all. And we want as few people to be turning up in hospital because they're unvaccinated with COVID, because that is both a terrible, terrible and avoidable problem now, but also puts huge extra strains on our doctors who have so many backlog of cases to look after us all as well.
OK, let's go back to where I was talking about, which was Tory SLEAZE. How much does it cost to become a member of the House of Lords these days?
So across all parties, people are put forward to join the House of Lords because they have usually done enormously good work. It could be scientific expertise, it could be business expertise, it could be charitable good works. There's all sorts of reasons why all parties put forward representatives that they wish to go into the House of Lords to bring their depth of knowledge in their particular sphere to that upper chamber, and it brings an amazing mix of people. We hear some of their debates. They're so erudite, deeply thought through. They're a really important chamber, and all parties put forward excellent people to take on those roles.
They could also donate £3 million to the party and be a treasurer, as has happened on the last 16 occasions. That works as well, doesn't it?
So many business people who have therefore donated to their parties, Lord Sugar is one for the Labour Party, we have some on our side, do so because they believe in political activity. We have an incredible system in the UK where we don't ask the state to fund our political parties. And if we didn't have the private donations that come through from donors, large and small, in my constituency, people donate, £25 a year, and donors who can provide more do more. If we didn't do that, the state would have to pay, and the taxpayer would be funding political activity. Now, I think our UK system is uniquely well placed to ensure that we get this broad stretch. The unions fund a great deal of the Labour Party's activity. Again, that's from many small voices and then some large ones too. It's a mix which brings a real depth of voices to our political parties across the piece.
OK, but is it right to say, yes or no is fine, that all recent party treasurers, all the past 16, have all become Lords? Is that right?
I don't have the statistics in front of me, but people in the Conservative Party who take on the challenge
of the telly today. You didn't read the article yesterday in the paper, no?
I'm afraid I haven't read every paper because I'm busy setting up for today's adaptation day here at COP26.
Me too, which is but I still had time to read the paper. These treasurers of each...
Good. Yes.
Thank you. Each of them have donated at least £3 million to the party. Is it appropriate that if you donate £3 million, you can buy yourself a peerage? Is that the way that we want to see our House of Lords?
So people are put forward for peerages, as I've said, for all sorts of reasons, and I don't think that someone who happens to have been an extremely good businessman and have made a great deal of money through business activity, usually also an enormous amount of philanthropy as well. Those are the sort of people who are across our country, amazing people of all political colours, that they should be barred from going to the House of Lords because they have made a lot of money, employed many thousands of people, run incredible businesses at their own risk, that somehow is a bar. That's not the case. And those who choose to put themselves forward in political environments as well as their business and philanthropic ones will go through the process just like anyone else. And we want a rich mix in the House of Lords of voices with experience of all the sectors of our country.
Yeah, let's talk about the Standards Commissioner. Apparently, given what was said by Kwasi Kwarteng last week, amongst other things, saying that she should consider her position, it's reported that she's been given police protection after threats to her life, given what happened last week with Owen Paterson. That cannot be right, can it?
Well, speaking as a woman who has also had terrible death threats, it is incredibly hard, and we have to be very resilient these days, particularly as women in public life, and it is very hard, and it is always unacceptable that those think they can push us around and threaten us. Those voices of those people who are aggressing women who are in public life is totally unacceptable. The police are incredibly supportive, and I hope that obviously Catherine has the support that she needs through this. But this is something that comes at many women. We've heard Angela Rayner's been under attack, for whether or not how she speaks her mind is her own choice, but it is always unacceptable for there to be death threats. And following the tragic, ghastly death of my colleague David Amos just a few weeks ago, we continue to know that we have to be incredibly resilient as politicians and people in public life. This is not how we want our country to be, and we need to all work forwards to make sure that the commentary is considered and carefully done, and that we can all do our jobs across the piece in an environment of safety.
Should Catherine Stone consider her position? Was Kwasi Kwarteng right?
So she is independently appointed, and she will continue to do her job, and I'm no doubt she will. As I say, we were talking earlier, the Speaker of the House, I think, will be making a statement about considering how to amend the way the committee works that Catherine runs, and I think that's the conversation that we need to have, because colleagues have for some time felt that the way the committee works doesn't have all the relevant protections and safeguards that it should have. So we will continue to do that, and I hope that Catherine's situation will be eased and that those aggressive voices will be removed from her environment.
So in answer to my question?
So I think Catherine needs to be allowed to get on with her job.
OK, so she shouldn't consider her position. Should
Well,
members of Parliament.
There are colleagues who step away from Parliament because the threats to them become untenable. I mean, the point is that we should not be in an environment where that is a difficult environment, and we have to be very resilient, as all of us in public life, of any political colour, and indeed personally. But that is the reality. That is the reality of where we are.
Because you didn't like what she was saying. That's my question. Given that you didn't like what she was saying, you voted against her decision and voted in favour of your former colleague Owen Paterson, and Kwasi Kwarteng said that
I was here.
I meant as a party, as the government collectively. My question is, given the results that she came back with, do you think she should consider her position?
So the process was followed through and there was a vote in the House as there is. As Jacob Rees-Mogg said, there was an error in the conflation of the individual case of Owen Paterson and indeed this wider question, which I think will be debated at length today, and I think the Speaker will be talking to later on about whether the framework under which Catherine Stone works at the moment is correct, or whether it also needs a separate appeals process, and that will be discussed, and colleagues in a cross-party way will determine how to move that forwards under the Speaker's leadership, and that is, I think, very good news. Catherine Stone is the woman in charge of working with the tools and the framework that exists at the moment, and absolutely she has had to be very resilient through some of these challenges, for which I feel for her as a fellow woman who has also had death threats for entirely unreasonable positions from people whose anger allows to spill over into violence.
Should MPs have second jobs?
So this has been an issue that's kicked around for many years, and I think there are arguments either way. We have a wonderful mix of colleagues. So my view is that I think most who do, for instance, those who are doctors and nurses who continue to maintain their professional credentials and indeed serve in their original profession. I think the question of whether MPs having jobs that involve lobbying, I think perhaps should be looked at again. But I think across the board, I don't think we should have a removal of the ability to maintain or have a second job, because it brings a richness to our role as members of Parliament, as well as the work we do day to day with our constituents.
You're at COP26. Do you want to have a quick word about that before we let you go, Mr. Trevelyan?
Thank you. Yes, here at COP26 today, it's the Adaptation Day, which is one of the really important aspects that historic COPs haven't focused on. We've made it a really central plank of all the work we've been doing as the COP presidency, and we're going to be announcing an extra £290 million to support the least developed countries and small island states to help tackle the urgent challenges that they need to be resilient and to adapt to the climate shocks that are coming now. Even if we fix the CO2 emissions challenge today, we would see the heightened climate impacts continuing to affect those most vulnerable countries for up to 100 years to come. So adaptation to the changing climate in their own locally led communities is critical, and this is something we're going to be discussing in depth today and hearing from voices across the world about how they're adapting and how they're becoming more resilient to the day-to-day challenges of these climate shocks.
Good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Thank you. And just a reminder, if you want to catch up on any of our interviews or watch the programme when you are out and about this morning, of course you can. You can find us on the mobile app or go to our website and go into our live blog to watch the programme. And you can catch up on the interviews on my Twitter as well, if you would like to. Twitter feed at Kay Burley. Returning now to one of our other top stories, and the Chief Exec of NHS England has warned that we are facing a winter like no other, with both COVID and flu putting an increased pressure on the service. The health service is appealing to the unvaccinated to come forward and be jabbed. Shingi Marariki is joining us now. Hello to you, Shingi. So there are people who are still not vaccinated at all, and the National Health Service is saying now's the time.
Morning, Kay. Indeed, there are. And it's interesting when you look at the figures. The Department for Health has said that 30% of over 80s and 40% of over 50s have yet to come forward for their booster jabs. And now we're moving into hearing a bit about the language of lockdowns and restrictions again. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, is encouraging people to come forward to get their boosters to help play their part and also to stop there being any lockdown restrictions over Christmas. And from today, the government is making it easier for people to book their third jabs in advance. Why is this important? It's because the waning effect or the effect of waning immunity is beginning to be seen. We've heard reports of people who have had 2 doses of the jab, people who are clinically vulnerable and elderly, now ending up in hospital 6 months after having the jab. Some of those people are dying as well. We know that the winter is about to bite. There are record NHS waiting lists as well. And I think the message from the government is more people need to get jabs in their arms as soon as possible.
OK, Vinay, thank you. First time in more than 600 days, can you believe it? Transatlantic travel has resumed in an important milestone for COVID economic recovery. Fantastic news, isn't it? Paul Kelso at Heathrow for us. And it's going to be quite a funky takeoff, isn't it, Paul, in a little while?
Yes, it is. This is a big day for the airline industry, particularly the British airline industry. And British Airways and Virgin Atlantic, they are sworn rivals. They spent most of the last couple of decades kicking lumps out of each other. Well, today they are staging a joint takeoff of their first 2 transatlantic flights to the US, carrying British-based passengers as the US border reopened about 2 hours ago now this morning. They're going to take off simultaneously here at Heathrow as they mark the reopening of an absolutely crucial route to their businesses. They're based on a huge amount of business and leisure travel to the United States. BA will start flying to 17 destinations today, and that will rise into the mid-20s. Gives you an idea of just how important those transatlantic routes are. And they'll be carrying mainly, in the first instance, it appears, people reuniting with relatives, partners, loved ones who they've been unable to see on any kind of regular basis. The US has not had the UK border open since March 2020, albeit US travellers has been able to fly here since July. So there has been a little bit of contact, but we can only imagine what that kind of almost 2-year gap in being able to visit loved ones has meant. You will still have to go through the COVID hoops. You'll need to be double vaccinated. You need to take a test at least within 3 days of departure, and another one 2 days after you arrive in the United States. So there's still some restrictions, but another big sign of a return to normal in international travel. And both the airlines, BA and Virgin, hope they will see them start to return to the kind of revenues that have been decimated by COVID, with a cost of at least 5,000 jobs for the 2 airlines we've talked about.
OK, Paul, for now, thanks so much indeed. And we'll be speaking to the head of Virgin Atlantic and a couple of pilots as well. So synchronised takeoffs on the 2 runways at Heathrow, 27L and 27R. That's going to be pretty cool, isn't it? And we'll cover that for you live via the Skycopter later on. I know, we spoil you. Still to come on the programme, speaking to the chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards, Chris Bryant, ahead of the emergency debate in Parliament later on today. And I'll get the view of one of only 3 Conservative members who sit on the Standards Committee. That's Alberto Costa. And then at 7:45, we'll speak to the young climate activist who has been cleaning the beaches of Blythe with her trusted teddy bear. That to come. Meantime, looking at some of the other stories making news this morning for you, taking you to Texas, one of the first of many expected lawsuits has been filed on behalf of a man injured in the crush at a Travis Scott concert in Texas. Attorneys for Manuel Sousa are suing Scott, Live Nation and others, saying they were responsible. Investigators are expected to examine the design of safety barriers to figure out what went wrong on Friday night. The identities of some of the 8 people who died have started to emerge. 2 best friends and a teenage student who loved dancing are among the victims.
There just wasn't enough security telling people to push move back, because we were literally just up against the rails and could barely breathe.
Because literally I was in that initial group, up close to the stage, and I literally was like this the whole time, and I couldn't move. So as soon as he came out, the wave just kind of crushed me in.
Police have called off the search for a swimmer who was attacked by a shark in Western Australia on Saturday. Paul Millichip, believed to be originally from the UK, was described as a wonderful father before he fell victim to the predator. Police only managed to turn up a pair of goggles thought to belong to Mr. Millichip after an extensive marine search. His wife, who didn't wish to be named, reportedly thanked nearby teenagers who helped raise the alarm to the attack and paid a heartfelt tribute to her husband.
Rest in peace, Paul. He died what he was enjoyed doing the most, which was exercising. He was a wonderful man, wonderful father, and he loved his exercise. We had been going down to the beach 2 or 3 times a week. We would go running first and then go swimming, and he went for, he swam for a kilometre. Was due to swim for a kilometre on Saturday. I just went into the water and out again because it's cold, and I'm not a huge fan of the cold water.
A police official in France has been injured in an attack, according to the country's interior minister. Gérald Darmanin posted a tweet saying the incident took place in Cannes in the south of France. He said the assailant has been neutralised and that he'll go to the scene later on today. A bus has been hijacked and set on fire in the Belfast suburb of Newton Abbey. Police say 4 masked men got onto the bus, ordered the passengers and the driver to get off, and then torched the vehicle. No injuries have been reported. The Defence Secretary has said the Army's woefully behind the rest of the public sector in allowing women to have careers, and it must do better. Ahead of a crunch meeting with senior generals, Ben Wallace told Sky News is vital to creating the right kind of culture. His highly unusual intervention followed a series of concerning claims involving the Army's handling of allegations of abuse and harassment.
The Army has been, in public, there's been significant issues around some of the discipline processes. There's been, worries by women serving in the Army that we saw in the evidence they gave to the House of Commons. And I'm really determined that we don't squander the new reforms in the Army by failing to fix and get right the culture and where we're going in the future.
Elon Musk's more than 62 million Twitter followers says the Tesla chief should sell 10% of his stake in the electric car maker. The SpaceX founder had suggested selling part of his holdings to pay taxes and asked for his followers to give their view. It comes after a proposal in the US Congress to tax billionaires' assets to help pay for Joe Biden's social and climate change agenda. Mr. Musk has said that he was prepared to accept either outcome of the poll. Quick look at the weather, very quick look at the weather for you.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Forecast is mixed with Atlantic rain spreading south and then lingering for several days. Early mist and fog will clear from southern and eastern parts to give a bright but chilly start to the day. Milder but cloudy in the west with rain over Ireland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
We love these pictures, don't we? These are the latest coming from the Cumbre Vieja volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma, continuing to spew lava and ash over the weekend. Scientists say the eruption that's alternatively ebbed and surged since September could last for around another 3 months. More than 7,000 people have been evacuated from their homes due to the threat of the lava. Now, one's a Conservative MP, the other is a Labour MP, but they both sit on the House of Commons Committee on Standards. Speaking to them both after the break. Coming up in just a second, we'll be speaking to Chris Bryant. He's the chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards. Before that, though, Labour demanding Boris Johnson apologises to the nation over the Owen Paterson lobbying scandal ahead of an emergency debate on parliamentary standards due to take place later on today. The Prime Minister has been told he should consider his position following his aborted effort to block a Commons suspension of the former Tory MP. I asked the International Trade Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, whether second jobs for MPs should be reconsidered.
We have a wonderful mix of colleagues. So my view is that I think most who do, for instance, those who are doctors and nurses who continue to maintain their professional credentials and indeed serve in their original profession. I think the question of whether MPs having jobs that involve lobbying, I think perhaps should be looked at again. But I think across the board, I don't think we should have a removal of the ability to maintain or have a second job, because it brings a richness to our role as members of Parliament, as well as the work we do day to day with our constituents.
Chris Bryant is with us, as I said, chair of the House of Commons Committee on Standards. Hello, thanks for joining us on the programme. Reconsidering whether MPs should have lobbying jobs.
We already have a rule on this. We've had it since 1695. It says that you can't lobby for, or you can't engage in paid advocacy. In other words, you can't lobby government ministers and officials on behalf of of a paying client of yours. That's exactly what Owen Paterson was found guilty of. He did it not just once, but on 14 occasions. He was being paid £112,000 a year, which is more than the average cost of a house in my constituency in the Rhondda. And he pursued the commercial interests of his paying clients. It's very clearly already forbidden.
You can.
What you could do...
You can receive funds, you just can't lobby...
But you can't lobby government ministers and officials.
You can offer guidance as a second job to... So if he had been offering guidance to Randox without then trying to put pressure on government ministers, that would have been fine.
Well, and so this is, I think, the grey area, which the committee... there's another committee, the Committee on Standards in Public Life, which is completely separate from Parliament, and it has recommended for the last few years that you should have a rule saying you can't... MPs can, of course, be a GP, or they can serve, you know, they can help in an accident and emergency, they can have all those kind of jobs, professional jobs, they can write books, they can they can do broadcasting and things like that. But the one thing that they shouldn't be able to do is have a job where they are effectively peddling access to Parliament. And you could argue that any job where you're a sort of consultant, a strategic consultant on parliamentary affairs, is in the end breaches that rule. So it's one of the many things that we're looking at the moment in the Standards Committee. We're meant to review the Code of Conduct every Parliament. We didn't do that in the last Parliament because it was so short. We're very close to producing a new report on all of that. And but it does worry me sometimes that, I mean, in essence, last week, it was a terrible, terrible reputational damage that the House did to itself by voting to park the issue of whether Owen Paterson had behaved inappropriately in a kind of lay-by, and to try and blow up the whole standard system just to protect Owen Paterson. We've got to rescind all of that. We've got to undo that damage, and I hope we can do that tomorrow.
We know what the government was trying to do. They got themselves tied in knots, but basically what they were trying to say was there wasn't an appeals procedure in place like there would be with an industrial tribunal for a layperson.
There is an appeals process. What happens is that the Commissioner produces her report once she's independent of everybody, and once she's decided that there's been a breach, then she sends that memorandum to our committee. We've not seen anything until that moment. We heard Owen's appeal, both in writing. We published all the documents that he sent to us, including all the witness statements that he provided, and we listened to him for the best part of 2.5 hours. Unfortunately, I mean, the facts just spoke for themselves. Now, there may be elements of the process that we could tidy up, but I've spoken to several employment lawyers over the weekend and former High Court judges who said there are very few people who would get such a rigorous and fair process in their ordinary day, in their ordinary place of employment up and down the country. Of course, MPs shouldn't be treated worse than anybody else, but Owen really did have a fair hearing and due process.
So you say certain aspects of the process should be looked at again, like what?
Well, one of the rules that we've just referred to, maybe we can make that clearer. I'm still a bit shocked that Anne-Marie Trevelyan didn't understand that we already have a rule that forbids paid lobbying. I think we may want to look at the relationship between the Commissioner and the committee about whether we should give her greater independence. at the same time wanting to make sure that some of the horrific bullying that we've seen over the last few weeks, when people have tried to bully her into not doing investigations, that she is properly protected. I think I want to keep the independence. We might want to say, you know, at the final stage, there should be also an appeal on the sanction. There is an appeal on the facts, but maybe there should be an appeal on the sanction, and who that should be decided by. I think we'll lay all of that out in our report in the next few days and weeks. We're very close to producing a report. And then the House can think about this in the new year. I don't think we should leap into making sudden changes. We should do that in a cool, calm and collected way. People have to call off the dogs. The government, I mean, one of my fundamental principles is government shouldn't, I mean, it should steer clear of independent disciplinary processes, because otherwise, you know, it felt last week as if we were all walked into a quagmire by the government, and lots of Tory MPs are very fed up, and I'm fed up about it too.
Kwasi Kwarteng told me on the programme that the chair, the commissioner, should consider her position. Do you think she should?
No, she should stay. She's done a magnificent job. She is resilient, which is just as well, because honestly, the attempts to lobby members of the committee, which itself is a breach of the rules, which can lead to a suspension. The attempts to bully her, all the briefing against her in the press. I'm told that some WhatsApp groups, I mean, are just full of libelous comments about her. You know, MPs set the system up only 2.5 years ago. Only 2.5 years ago. Andrea Leadsom was the person who tabled it in the House of Commons. And I think we need to stick with that system. We have a committee, the Standards Committee, which will produce a report on some possible changes in the next few weeks, and then everybody can consider them in the calmness of the new year.
Who was lobbying the committee?
Well, quite a lot of members. I don't really want to inflame that issue, but there have been a couple of occasions when
It's an allegation, though, isn't it? I mean,
yes, it is, and I'm not laying it in against...
Were they Conservative or Labour?
I'm not, Kay. Much as I love you, I'm not going to have a go at individuals. I want us to get to a place where everybody understands you can't lobby members of the committee. I had to say to a couple, I had to say... I'm not aware of...
I hear younger members of the committee were being bullied to side against Patterson.
I've been told... I don't know about that. Not about members of the committee, I don't know, but I'm certain that it's been a very stressful time for all the members of the committee over the last few weeks, because it's been very high profile. I think the campaign that was waged in the Telegraph and by some of Owen's friends was... well, I think it was Mark Harper, the former government Conservative chief whip, who said that it was the most unedifying thing he'd seen. Normally, a committee report, especially when it's as categorical as ours is, simply goes through the House without a motion, without a vote or a division. I think it was utterly inappropriate what the government did last week.
So as
but we can rescue this.
OK, so chair of the committee would not tolerate any member of the committee being bullied?
For a start, we have a very clear guidelines on bullying. If anybody has been bullied, that should be reported to through the ICGS system for sexual harassment and bullying in Parliament. That isn't dealt with by our committee. It's dealt with by the independent expert panel, which is chaired by Sir Stephen Owen, and I'm absolutely sure that he would take any allegations of that kind very, very seriously.
The Prime Minister is likely not to be at this emergency discussion later on today, emergency debate. I spoke to Anne-Marie Trevelyan. She said that's fine. What do you think?
Actually, I'd prefer him to stick away from all of these issues. He shouldn't have been in the chamber to talk about it last week. He shouldn't have been, marching his troops up to the top of the hill to vote down or vote for that most bizarre motion. I mean, when you think about it, the strangest part of the motion that the Prime Minister wanted everybody to vote for last week was that it was changing due process at the very last point in that process for a named individual. That is not the way you provide justice for anybody. It's the polar opposite of justice. It's what Viktor Orban would do in Hungary. It's not what we do in Britain.
As far as his two holidays are concerned, Mustique and Marbella, and of course Wallpapergate, does he still have questions to answer there?
Well, on Mustique, we did a report, and I think even the Prime Minister would accept that he had a fair hearing of us. We did have some criticisms of the way he sort of dragged the process out and kept on being unable to provide answers to some of the questions that the Commissioner had asked. I'm not going to comment on any other case that might or might not occur, because we do have a genuinely independent process, which is that, first of all, the Commissioner, if she thinks it's right, investigates. I think she's already said in relation to the redecoration of Downing Street that she's going to wait until such time as the Electoral Commission have finished their work to decide whether or not to start an investigation. But she's independent. I'm not going to tell her whether she should or shouldn't engage in anything to do with that, and I'm not going to comment on it.
And apparently your leader has suggested that the Prime Minister should consider his position.
Well, look, I mean, I'm a Labour MP. I'm not an enormous fan of the Prime Minister.
Big step, though, to say consider his position. Don't often hear words like that from the opposition.
I'm here as chair of the Standards Committee. I'm not going to be waving any kind of party banner this morning. You see, the thing is, as you know, I think, Kay, I care passionately about Parliament. I'm going later on this morning to a conference about acquired brain injury, something I've been banging on about for ages, and concussion in sport and so on. I've got a private members' mill I want to get through in 3 weeks' time on the 3rd of December, which would, I think, help people. And I can only do that if people have trust in Parliament, in parliamentary democracy. We are all there because we want to change the world. Well, there's the danger, of course, that if government repeatedly tries to defend somebody for what is a corrupt practice, then of course the danger is that people will lose confidence, not just in one party, but in the whole of politics. So that's why I take my job as chair of the Standards Committee really, really seriously. We're very well served by a very good commissioner. We've got 7 magnificent lay members who come from completely different backgrounds. It's quite a lot of them have been involved in similar bodies in other professions, and 7 members, and the 7 elected members don't always agree, but we did on this. On Owen Paterson, we were absolutely categorical. He had broken the rules, not just once, but on 14 occasions. And it genuinely saddened me last week that the government got this so completely and utterly wrong.
Chris Bryant, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Sure.
Thank you. And the SLEAZE Drive features on many of the morning's front pages as well, of course. Let's start with the I. The PM battles to contain Tory SLEAZE backlash as Boris Johnson prepares to face Parliament over the handling of the Owen Paterson scandal, is how they see it. The Metro also focuses on Conservative MPs joining the growing backlash against Mr Johnson, despite one senior minister dismissing the row over SLEAZE as a storm in a teacup. The Daily Mirror seized police under pressure to probe a cash for honours scandal over peerages for Tory party donors. Well, let's hear from another member of the committee, one of the 3 Conservative MPs on the Standards Committee, and that's Alberto Costa. Hello to you, Mr Costa. Thank you for joining us on the programme. You just heard some of the thoughts of your chairman. Do you broadly agree with what he had to say?
Broadly, the Standards Committee works on the basis, wherever possible, of unanimity. But Chris and I have been discussing for almost 2 years, and I was a member of the committee before Chris, the changes that would benefit those that complain against MPs as well as MPs themselves. I think, Kay, what's really important to outline is that the Committee on Standards is currently constituted as a committee of 14 people. I don't know of any other disciplinary group as large as that, but I think where the changes need to be made is that the Commissioner is the investigator of cases and the presenter of cases to me and my colleagues, but then she attends the committee wearing a different hat as the principal advisor to the committee. And I think that puts the Commissioner in an unenviable position that she has to have these 2 conflicting hats. The problem lies with the House of Commons' own rules, known as standing orders. And I've argued with Chris over many months now that the rules need to be changed in order to ensure that we have a much better system. And the second and final thing I'd say is this. We've already brought into the House of Commons former High Court judges. I'm quite happy to relinquish my role as an adjudicator in these matters. I don't think MPs should be adjudicating on disciplinary matters involving other MPs. I think we should bring in the judiciary, as we've done for bullying and sexual harassment claims, and make sure that the Committee on Standards, with lay people, retains a role as the drafting body of the Code of Conduct and the associated rules, but let the Commissioner present her case to judges and let judges be the ultimate arbiters of this issue.
Are you suggesting that potentially, if that had been the case, there may have been a different conclusion with the case of Owen Paterson?
Well, I'm not going to get into that particular case, but what I will say is that I've been passionately arguing for change. Up until very recently, I was the only lawyer on that committee, a committee of 14 people, was the only lawyer that was able to say as a member of that committee that in the outside world, usually with disciplinary groups, you have panels of 3 people. But Kay, if any of your viewers were being disciplined at work, they would be given the right to appear before the committee or make representations to the committee. A HR manager might make representations, but what the HR manager would not necessarily be is then go on to advise the very panel that she's just been making representations to. And if you do have a system like that in work, the ultimate arena to resolve these issues is a court of law. We don't have that in the House of Commons, and that's why the Standards Committee must change. It has to improve to ensure that we've got a much more transparent system where we adopt as close as possible rules and practices, processes, and appeal system which as closely as possible mirrors a court of law. And that's why I think it's high time now that I'm listened, Chris listens to me, and that we bring in judges as we've done for the independent experts panel.
As you say, you've been having this negotiation, this discussion for months. One wonders why it was conflated in the way that it was last week.
Well, the government were right to regret the conflation of the 2 issues. But look, my role as one of the more senior MP members of the Standards Committee, and the only lawyer until recently on that committee, is to make sure that the committee members understand that in the real world, there are norms of appeal processes, there are rules of evidence that tell you who you can and cannot bring before you. And I do want to remove that unenviable position that the Commissioner is in. I want to support the Commissioner by making the rules much clearer that she should remain the investigator and the presenter of cases, but she should not have the conflicting role of then going on to advise the very committee that's considering her own report. I don't think that's fair on the Commissioner. I don't think that's fair in the committee, and I certainly don't think that's fair on those that complain, or indeed the MPs that receive the complaints. But it's time that we bring in former High Court judges, as we've done for the independent experts panel, which hears bullying and sexual harassment claims, to ensure that MPs are no longer involved in the direct adjudication of these matters. That's the fair way to do that. That's the way that I would expect the House of Commons to go forward. And I'm quite confident that in a few months' time, that in fact will be the system as we go forward.
You talked about bullying there. There are allegations that younger members of the committee were bullied into making the decisions that they made. The chairman, who I spoke to a moment ago, said he wasn't aware of that in any way, shape or form. Were you?
Well, I can't say that any member of the committee has come to me and said that they've been bullied into making any decision. Look, it was a unanimous report. We all stand by that report, and this isn't about questioning the veracity of that report. What this is about is my primary duty as a member of the Standards Committee under the rules is to oversee the work of the Commissioner. And it's important that members of the committee, both MPs and lay people, are able to do that job without fear or favour in ensuring that we scrutinise the work of the Commissioner. And wherever possible, if the Commissioner has done a good job, we uphold the Commissioner's finding. But what we can do is enhance the process, ameliorate the process, and make sure that we've got proper rules of process and a proper appeal system that currently is not there. And that's why I've been passionately arguing for almost 2 years that we need to change the rules and make it much more transparent and remove MPs from the process, bring in former members of the judiciary, and make it a system that members of the public have full trust in.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. We appreciate it. Thank you. Second week of COP26 hasn't gone off to the best of starts. Australia's Resource Minister, Keith Pitt, has pledged to continue selling coal as long as there's a demand for it. Time now to meet the incredible 8-year-old girl who's been picking up litter on beaches every day since she was 3. Rhea Faye Waddle has managed to collect a staggering 400,000 plastic bottles for the past 5 years with her trusty teddy bear at her side. Hello to you both.
Hi.
What's the teddy bear called?
Cranberry pie. Cranberry pie.
Cranberry Pie, great name. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us. Tell me, Mum, Tracy, how you've both first got involved with picking up litter.
Yes, Rhea was a very small child and she first noticed polar bears fighting with a bin liner in Svalbard when she was very young in a newspaper. And she asked the question, how did that bin liner get there? And that's when it began. And she didn't want them fighting with the plastic because it wasn't food. And that was when she was about 3 years old.
Good girl. So, Rhea, then what do? I mean, 400,000 bottles, that's so many. I don't know how you've managed to count them all. What do? You go down to the beach or you go down to the local park and pick them all up?
I go everywhere.
Do you? Good for you. And then what do you do with them?
Bring them to the tip.
Do you? Good girl. Does she go out in all weathers, Tracy?
Every single day. We're out 365 days a year, even when it's raining, blowing a hoolie, as she calls it, with Cranberry. She's out every day, even Christmas Day, and she's checking that the marine animals are safe.
And do people, I mean, obviously she must be a bit of a celebrity locally now in Blyth. Do people help?
Yes, Rhea's got 12 bins now. Do you want to talk about your bins, Rhea? What's your bins called? Flip-flop the wheel. She has a flip-flop the wheel bin, and it reminds people not to forget their flip-flops during the summer times. And one little bin saved 15,000 items this summer. Everyone along the shorelines helped, and any plastic they found, they popped it into our bin and we took it to the tip.
And Rhea, tell me about other people at school. Do they come and help you sometimes as well?
No. Rhea's home. So she's taught at home, and then we'll go out every single day and do our environment work outside. So anyone that sees inspired by her and their copy.
Yeah. And Rhea, what do you want to do when you finish homeschooling? When you're a bit bigger, what do you want to do then?
Be a midwife or marine biologist. Okay, what you want to be? Be a midwife or marine biologist or something.
Oh, a midwife or a marine biologist. Aiming high there, Mum.
Yes. She's studying medicine as well, so she's very interested in the safety of the marine animals and the seabirds and all the wildlife as well.
Fantastic. Tracy, you must be so proud of her.
I'm really proud of Rhea, as her dad is and her brothers. She really is saviour of the sea. She calls the wildlife parks the wildlife's living room that we're invited into. And really the human behaviour is affecting all the wildlife, all the marine animals. And Rhea wants to stop this from happening. She's got her potion from the ocean there with 50 pieces in. And she asked people, would you drink this? And obviously the answer is no. But the marine animals don't have a voice. They can't say no. They don't want to drink that.
Talk to both of you. We've got to leave it there. Back to school. See you soon. Thanks a lot.